What if I told you that one of the most advanced armies in the world was defeated by a network of underground tunnels and guerrilla fighters? The Vietnam War was a conflict like no other, filled with unimaginable bravery, devastating loss, and lasting impact. This is the story of the Vietnam War, a conflict that changed the world and left a lasting impact on both Vietnam and America. It's a tale of triumph, tragedy, and legacy that continues to resonate today. We'll delve into the initial involvement of the United States, significant events such as the Tet Offensive and the My Lai Massacre, and the powerful role of media that brought the war into American living rooms. From the Gulf of Tonkin to the fall of Saigon, we'll uncover the events that defined this war and the personalities who shaped its course. Our journey will cover the crucial moments that turned the tide of the Vietnam War. We'll explore the Gulf of Tonkin incident, how a naval encounter escalated U.S. involvement, the Tet Offensive, a series of surprise attacks that changed public perception, the My Lai Massacre, a dark chapter that highlighted the war's brutality, Operation Rolling Thunder, a relentless bombing campaign with far-reaching consequences, the fall of Saigon, the dramatic end of the war and the reunification of Vietnam. Alongside these events, we'll meet key figures like General William Westmoreland, Ho Chi Minh, and Daniel Ellsberg, whose actions and decisions influenced the course of the war. But more than just events and figures, this is about the human stories, the soldiers, the civilians, the protesters, and the leaders. Their experiences and sacrifices define the true legacy of the Vietnam War. To truly understand the Vietnam War, we need to hear the voices of those who lived through it. Meet John, a U.S. soldier who fought in the dense jungles of Vietnam, and Lan, a Vietnamese citizen who witnessed her village torn apart by conflict. John's and Lan's stories are just two of the millions of lives touched by the Vietnam War. Their experiences remind us that behind every battle and strategy, there are human lives forever changed by the war. As we explore the Vietnam War, keep these personal stories in mind. They are the heart of our journey, showing us the war's true impact on individuals and communities. In 1961, with a vision of America as the leader of the free world, President Kennedy made a pivotal decision that would change the course of history. He decided to send U.S. troops to Vietnam. Kennedy believed that the United States had a responsibility to stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. This decision marked the beginning of a long and costly involvement. The mission was clear: stop the spread of communism and support the South Vietnamese government. American advisors began training South Vietnamese forces, but it quickly became evident that this war would be unlike any other. The strategy was known as containment. The goal was to prevent the domino effect, where one country's fall to communism would lead to the spread of communism in neighboring countries. To achieve this, the U.S. provided military and economic aid to South Vietnam, hoping to build a stable government that could resist communist forces. But the Viet Cong, with their guerrilla tactics, presented a formidable challenge. The Viet Cong used innovative tactics, such as digging extensive tunnel networks to move undetected and launching coordinated attacks that caught U.S. forces off guard. American forces quickly realized that this war would be unlike any they had fought before. The early battles were brutal and highlighted the challenges of fighting an enemy who knew the terrain intimately. One of the first major engagements was the Battle of Ap Bac in 1963. Despite superior numbers and firepower, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces faced heavy losses against a well-prepared Viet Cong force. These early encounters demonstrated that traditional military tactics would need to be adapted. The war in Vietnam required a new approach, one that accounted for the unique challenges posed by the terrain and the enemy. As the conflict escalated, so did the commitment of U.S. forces. What began as a mission to support an ally was quickly turning into a full-scale war, with no clear end in sight. On the eve of the Tet Lunar New Year in 1968, the streets of Saigon were bustling with holiday traffic. The Tet Festival, a time of celebration and peace, seemed to offer a brief respite from the ongoing conflict. Unbeknownst to the South Vietnamese and American forces, North Vietnam was preparing a massive surprise attack. The Tet Offensive would mark a turning point in the Vietnam War, shattering any illusion of imminent victory for the United States. North Vietnamese leaders planned the Tet Offensive to coincide with the holiday, believing that the element of surprise would catch their enemies off guard. The goal was to spark a general uprising and turn the tide of the war in their favor. More than 80,000 Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops launched simultaneous attacks on over 100 cities and towns across South Vietnam. The scale and coordination of the offensive were unprecedented, In the early hours of January 30th, 1968, the Tet Offensive began. All over Saigon, Viet Cong fighters launched surprise attacks, catching American and South Vietnamese forces off guard. The U.S. Embassy, a symbol of American presence, was under siege. Fierce battles erupted throughout the city. U.S. and South Vietnamese forces fought to regain control, but the Viet Cong had infiltrated deep into urban areas. The fighting was intense and brutal, with heavy casualties on both sides. One of the fiercest battles of the Tet Offensive took place in Hue, an ancient city with significant cultural and strategic importance. For 26 days, U.S. Marines and South Vietnamese forces battled to retake the city from entrenched Viet Cong fighters. The destruction in Hue was immense. Historic buildings were reduced to rubble, and the civilian population suffered greatly. The battle for Hue became a symbol of the Tet Offensive's intensity and the heavy toll it took on all involved. The Tet Offensive had a profound impact on American public opinion. For the first time, the brutal realities of the Vietnam War were brought into American living rooms. The optimism of military leaders was starkly contrasted by the grim images on television screens. Cronkite's report marked a turning point in public perception. The American people began to question the government's narrative and the purpose of the war. Protests against the war intensified. From college campuses to city streets, Americans demanded an end to the conflict. The Tet Offensive shattered the myth of an easy victory and exposed the vulnerabilities of U.S. forces. The impact of the Tet Offensive extended beyond the battlefield. It galvanized the anti-war movement and forced political leaders to reconsider their strategies. The war in Vietnam was no longer just a distant conflict. It was a national crisis. The Vietnam War demonstrated the power of media in modern conflict. It showed how television could bring distant wars into the immediate consciousness of the public, altering perceptions and influencing policy. Television brought the front lines of Vietnam into homes across the United States. Images of combat, wounded soldiers, and grieving families starkly contrasted with official government reports of progress and victory. Journalists like Walter Cronkite, Morley Safer, and others played crucial roles in shaping public opinion. Their reports highlighted the grim realities of the conflict, often contradicting the optimistic statements from military and political leaders. One of the most significant reports was Morley Safer's coverage of the burning of Cam Ni, a Vietnamese village. Safer's footage showed American soldiers setting fire to huts, an act that shocked viewers and raised serious ethical questions about U.S. military conduct. The stark images and honest reporting brought the war's brutality to the forefront of public consciousness, challenging the government's narrative and fueling anti-war sentiment. The extensive media coverage of the Vietnam War played a crucial role in shaping public perception. As Americans watched the war unfold on their television screens, many began to question the purpose and morality of the conflict. Protests erupted across the country. From college campuses to city streets, the American public demanded an end to the war. The media's portrayal of the conflict fueled these protests and intensified public scrutiny of the government's actions. The Tet Offensive, in particular, had a profound impact on public opinion. The surprise attacks and heavy casualties shattered the illusion of imminent victory and highlighted the war's escalating brutality. Television coverage of the Tet Offensive brought graphic images of the conflict into American homes. The stark contrast between the government's optimistic reports and the harsh reality on the ground eroded public trust. Cronkite's broadcast, often cited as a turning point, resonated deeply with the American public. It underscored the growing disillusionment with the war and increased pressure on political leaders to seek a resolution. President Lyndon B. Johnson reportedly said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." The media's influence was undeniable, shaping not just public opinion but also political strategy. The Vietnam War was the first war to be extensively covered by television. For the first time, the brutal realities of conflict were broadcast directly into American living rooms, changing the way people perceived the war. The extensive media coverage of the Vietnam War remains a pivotal moment in history, illustrating the profound impact of journalism on public opinion and government policy. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was more than just a supply route. It was the lifeline of the North Vietnamese army, enabling them to sustain their war effort despite relentless U.S. bombing. Stretching over 12,000 miles, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a network of paths and roads that allowed North Vietnamese troops and supplies to move south. It passed through dense jungle, rugged mountains, and remote villages, Despite extensive bombing campaigns aimed at disrupting the trail, the North Vietnamese continually repaired and expanded it. Ingenious camouflage and underground bunkers made it nearly impossible to destroy completely. Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign from 1965 to 1968, targeted the Ho Chi Minh Trail and other strategic locations. However, the dense jungle and the resilience of the North Vietnamese rendered these efforts largely ineffective. The trail was not just a physical route. It was a symbol of North Vietnamese determination and resourcefulness. It demonstrated their ability to adapt and endure under the harshest conditions. The dense jungles of Vietnam provided the perfect environment for guerrilla warfare. The Viet Cong used the terrain to their advantage, employing hit-and-run tactics that frustrated and demoralized U.S. forces. The dense jungles of Vietnam provided the perfect environment for guerrilla warfare. The Viet Cong used the terrain to their advantage, employing hit-and-run tactics that frustrated and demoralized U.S. forces. Booby traps, or elephant traps as they were sometimes called, became a constant threat. These simple yet deadly devices inflicted significant casualties and created an atmosphere of constant danger. Punji stakes, bamboo spikes hidden in pits, and explosive devices were among the many traps used. Each step in the jungle could be fatal, making every patrol a nerve-wracking experience. The Viet Cong's ability to blend with the local population added another layer of complexity. Disguised as farmers by day and fighters by night, they could strike unexpectedly and vanish just as quickly. The U.S. military employed various strategies to counter these tactics, including search-and-destroy missions and defoliants like Agent Orange. However, these measures often had devastating effects on the civilian population and the environment. The war's brutality was not confined to the battlefield. It extended to the villages and farmlands, affecting the lives of countless civilians who found themselves caught in the crossfire. The guerrilla tactics and booby traps employed by the Viet Cong showcased their ingenuity and determination, making the Vietnam War one of the most challenging conflicts for the United States. The Tet Offensive marked a turning point in the Vietnam War. Despite its military setbacks, it was a strategic victory for North Vietnam, significantly weakening American public support for the war. As the war dragged on, the U.S. faced increasing pressure to withdraw. The American public grew weary of the endless conflict, and protests against the war intensified. President Richard Nixon's strategy of Vietnamization aimed to shift the burden of combat to South Vietnamese forces, allowing for the gradual withdrawal of American troops. Despite this, the fighting continued, and the casualties mounted. By 1973, the United States signed the Paris Peace Accords, officially ending direct U.S. involvement in the war. However, the conflict continued between North and South Vietnam. On April 30, 1975, Saigon fell to North Vietnamese forces, marking the end of the Vietnam War. The fall of Saigon led to the reunification of Vietnam under communist control. The images of the fall of Saigon are etched into history, a powerful reminder of the war's devastating conclusion and the human cost of conflict. The Vietnam War left deep scars on both Vietnam and the United States. The conflict claimed millions of lives, devastated the landscape, and left a legacy of pain and division. For Vietnam, the war resulted in reunification but at a tremendous cost. The country faced the immense task of rebuilding and healing from the destruction and loss. In the United States, the war led to widespread distrust in government, profoundly affecting American society and politics. It reshaped the nation's military policies and approaches to future conflicts. The Vietnam War taught us about the limits of military power and the resilience of determined forces. It highlighted the importance of understanding local contexts and the complexities of international conflicts. The story of the Vietnam War is a reminder of the complexities of war and the enduring human spirit. It is a tale of bravery, sacrifice, and resilience that continues to resonate with us today. As we reflect on this history, let us honor the memories of those who fought and those who lost their lives. Let us strive to learn from the past to build a future of peace and understanding. The Vietnam War may have ended decades ago, but its lessons remain relevant. Let us remember and learn so that the sacrifices made were not in vain. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Please share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful content.